Okay, we're going to continue with chapter 48, our mental illnesses. We left off, we were getting ready to start talking about personality disorders. And personality disorders involve rigid and maladaptive behaviors. And what we mean by maladaptive, it means that you change or you adjust in the wrong way, where you have difficulty functioning in society. It's a type of personality issue where you just have an unhealthy pattern of how you think, how you function, and how you behave to what society standards are. Another term or another type of problem that we see with mental illness, or what we consider mental illness, is substance abuse and addiction. So this occurs when a person overuses or depends on alcohol or drugs. So a substance involved in abuse and addiction affect the nervous system. And if you take in too much alcohol, you take in too much drugs, they can completely impact the way you think, the way your body processes things, and how you think and react to things. So when we look at alcohol abuse, there are certain terms that we look at with alcohol abuse. There is cravings, and cravings are just a strong need to drink, where you feel such a strong need to drink that you can't function, or you're constantly, okay, I can get through today if I can only get home and get a drink, or I can make it through the week if only I can go out and drink. I mean, it's just that need to drink, where that's kind of a driving force of what gets you through things. Loss of control is when you can't stop drinking. So you start drinking and you just can't stop. A physical dependence is when you actually start going through withdrawal symptoms when you do stop taking this, because your body has gotten so used to the alcohol that it can't function very well without it anymore. And then the term tolerance is when you need to keep drinking more to have the same effect. So let's say you drink 2 or 3 beers and it gives you a certain feeling and you like that feeling. Well, after a period of time, 2 to 3 isn't going to give you that feeling. You're going to have 4 or 5 to get that same feeling. And then after a while, you'll need more to get that same feeling, because your body will start building a tolerance to that level that you're taking in. Alcoholism is a chronic disease, and it is considered a disease. Lifestyle impacts it, and genetics impact it as well. If you had a parent that is an alcoholic, you have a much higher tendency or higher risk factor to become alcoholic yourself. Some people turn to alcohol for relief from life stressors. They feel stressed about something, so they're just going to have some alcohol to kind of deaden the feeling or to numb up some of their feelings. And then after a while, that craving for alcohol, it can just get so strong, and you like that feeling so much, and you start building those tolerances for it, that after a while you'll have a craving for alcohol that can be just the same that need that would have for food or for water. But alcoholism can be treated. There is some medication that can help with that, but generally it's a behavioral therapy program that people go through. And drug abuse and addiction is very similar. Okay, it's the overuse of a drug for non-medical or non-therapy effects. So it can be a recreational type drug like heroin, cocaine. It could be a prescription medication like oxycodone. Okay, but it's where you're taking it for not the purpose of what it was prescribed for, or for non-therapy effects. It is a chronic relapsing brain disease, drug addictions, and the person has an overwhelming desire to take the drug. They repeatedly take the drug because of its effect. And again, they build tolerances to it where they need higher amounts repeatedly to get that same effect. The person cannot stop taking the drug without the treatments. Eating disorders is the next thing we'll talk about. I thought this was really cute. It says, I don't care what it said. When you looked up the symptoms on the internet, you're not anorexic. And definitely this guy would not be considered anorexic. When we're looking at someone who has anorexia, it's called anorexia or anorexia nervosa. It's an intense fear of weight gain or obesity. And many times teenage girls and young women are the more common, statistically, the more commonly the people who get it. Can happen in young men as well, but it's generally seen more in women. They believe they're fat even though they are dangerously thin. And I mean dangerously thin to the point where they're not taking in enough to sustain themselves for their body to function properly. They have very poor eating habits. They avoid food. They avoid meals. They choose they choose very few foods, and they eat them in very small amounts. They weigh and measure their food, and then they tend to do intense exercise and sometimes vomiting or laxatives and enemas to make sure that they get rid of the food so it doesn't gain weight in their body. They may abuse diuretics with it, and this is exceptionally dangerous. Many people die from cardiac arrest that are anorexic or from suicide. This is a picture of someone who's anorexic. So you can see here she's dangerously thin, okay, to the point where, I mean, she looks unhealthy thin. But when a person who's anorexic, when they get on a scale, when they look at themselves in the mirror, even though we would see this, what they see for themselves is this. They do not clearly visualize what they look like. And so there is a higher tendency for young women to commit suicide because they have such a disproportionate belief of what their body looks like. And they generally will always need some counseling with this to help get them through it. Now, bulimia nervosa is a little different. With anorexia, they look exceptionally thin and unhealthy, but with bulimia, they actually will look normal weight. And with bulimia, they have what we call binge eating, and then they will in turn try to purge the food to get rid of it. And so what I mean by binge eating is they'll just eat and eat and eat, just huge, large, copious amounts of food. They just can't quit eating. And then they'll purge it to get rid of it. So they'll make themselves vomit, take laxatives, enemas, diuretics to help them get rid of all that food. And so they go through cycles of binge eating to purging to get rid of it to help them stay a normal weight. It's hard to tell sometimes. Some people can hide this really exceptionally well because they do look like a normal weight person. And so if you don't realize that this is happening, it can cause damage. The constant throwing up can cause damage to the esophagus. The constant laxatives and enemas, can cause problems to the bowel. So it can be very dangerous for the person. Suicide means to kill oneself, and it is so common. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. Firearms are more common in men. Poisonings tend to be more common in women. It's very common in our elderly population, and it's also very common in our teenage young adult population as well. Those are two of the more common areas we tend to see this in. Sometimes we think of high school. If you had a good high school experience, sometimes I'll hear people say in class, oh, high school was so fabulous. It was just such a great time. But for many people, high school is a horrible time in their life. Kids can be cruel. I mean, they can just flat out be cruel. And if you don't fit in, if you don't think the same, you don't dress the same, you don't act the same, you are treated horribly. And there are so many kids, in the 15 to 24 age group that think of suicide frequently. When people think about suicide, they tend to do this because they have a sense of hopelessness. They don't see any hope in their life. And so the thing we have to remember is if a person mentions or talks about suicide, we have to take them seriously. You can't think, oh, they're just joking or they're just fooling around. If they're talking about it, they're thinking about it. And so if you're in the hospital setting, you need to make sure you tell the nurse. Do not ever, if a patient tells you, oh, I'm going to tell you something, but you can't tell anyone. You know what? I always let the person know, you know what? I'll try to keep your confidence if I can, but if it's something that can make you unsafe or unhealthy, then I have to let the nurse know, because that is not a promise you're going to be able to keep. If the person is complaining or talking about suicide, you need to get them help. If you're at school and someone's talking about suicide, contact the health center or contact your instructor so we can get them help. Okay? It's, when people think about it, they many times follow up with it and they do it. I mean, enough to the point where, like I said, it's the 10th leading cause of death. So it's something that we really want to make sure that we're helping these people and getting these people help. All right, and I think that will conclude this chapter.